In our last lesson, we talked about some characteristics of the moon. We talked about how its surface is much different from Earth's. We talked about how it doesn't have the atmosphere that we have here on Earth. But in today's lesson, as we talk about phases of the moon, we're going to be talking about the moon as we observe it in the sky from Earth. In earlier lessons, we talked about how light produced by the sun gives us our cycle of day and night on Earth. And often at night when we look in the sky, we'll see the moon giving off light as well. And some people think that, well, just like the sun, the moon produces light. But it really doesn't. The moon is essentially a ball of dirt and rock, so it doesn't have any way of producing the light like the sun does. What we actually see when we see the moon's light in the sky is the sun's light reflected off the moon that's providing light for us. It's almost like if you take a light bulb or a flashlight and shine it at a mirror, shine it at a piece of aluminum foil, shine it at something that's reflective, you see that light bouncing back from that surface. That's what's happening with the moon. It's just bouncing off some of the light that's hitting it from the sun. So we see that reflected light when we look at the moon in the sky. In our last lesson, we said that the moon orbits or revolves around the Earth. And we also mentioned that the moon takes 28 days approximately to complete one revolution. And I like the graphic here on this slide because it does show all of these motions that we've talked about over the course of this unit happening at one time. It shows the Earth rotating on its axis, causing day and night. It shows Earth revolving around the sun, causing changes in seasons. And then it also shows the moon revolving or orbiting around the Earth. Now, as the moon does revolve around Earth, as we look at it over a period of several nights, we notice that its appearance in the sky will change. This series of changes that we see in the moon as it goes one complete revolution around Earth or makes one complete orbit around Earth is what's called one lunar cycle. We talked about cycles just being these processes that repeat, for example, the cycle of day and night, the cycle of seasons, and now we're looking at the lunar cycle as the moon makes revolutions around the Earth. Over the course of the lunar cycle, as the moon orbits the Earth, we see it from different angles depending on where it's positioned relative to the Earth and the sun. And over this 28-day lunar cycle, because of these different angles that we view the moon from, its appearance in the sky will change. And over the next few minutes, we're going to look at those changes, how they work, and what they're called. Now, as the moon changes shape, there's 8 major shapes that we would say are parts of the lunar cycle. Although it doesn't immediately change from one of these shapes to the other, it's more of a slow transition over the complete 28 days. But when we look at the graphic here, we can see the different phases of the moon, from the new moon to the waxing crescent, to the first quarter moon, to the waxing gibbous, to the full moon, to the waning gibbous, to the third quarter, to the waning crescent, and because it's a repeating cycle, after that waning crescent, the cycle would return to the full moon phase that we began with. Now, it's important to understand that even though the moon looks different, and some nights it might be brighter because we see a larger lit portion of the moon, that in reality, just like the sun always illuminates half of the Earth, the sun also always illuminates half of the moon. We don't see different shapes in the moon because it's getting different amounts of sunlight. We see different shapes in the moon because we're looking at the moon from different angles and seeing different amounts of the lit portion of the moon. Now, during the first half of the lunar cycle, which runs from the new moon, which is that phase where we see just the shadowed portion of the moon and don't really see a moon in the sky at night, all the way up until the full moon, where we see the entire lit half of the moon, where it's nice and big and round and lit up in the sky. During this first half, essentially what's happening is the visible portion of the moon is getting larger. It starts from not being able to see any of the lit portion all the way up to seeing all of the lit portion. So the moon is every night getting a little bit more round, getting a little bit larger in the sky. Now, the word that describes this process of the visible portion getting lighter, we say that the moon is waxing. So that just describes the moon's appearance getting more full. We see more of the lit portion as the moon waxes during the first half of the lunar cycle. In the second half of the lunar cycle, once we hit that full moon phase and are able to see the entire lit half of the moon's appearance essentially starts to get less round and smaller in the sky because now it's transitioning as it continues to orbit back to that new moon phase where we don't see any of the illuminated portion. And as the visible portion of the moon gets smaller in the sky, we say that the moon is waning. So it's important to understand the difference between a waxing moon, the moon growing larger, and a waning moon, the visible portion of the moon growing smaller in the sky. Over our next couple videos, we'll look at some labs and activities that we can do to better see these changes that happen during the 28-day lunar cycle and to give us a better idea of what causes the different phases of the moon that we can observe.